Hello everybody. I'm going to do a quick tutorial here on how to perform the Ken Burns effect. It's really an introduction to animating on the timeline, so let's get into it. You can see over here I've got my two pictures. You're going to have to use 10 for this assignment, but I'm just going to do the 2, and that should get you well on your way. And I've got them nicely named here as 01 underscore and 02 underscore, just to keep myself organized. I'm just going to drag that directly into my project. Now I'm looking at this here right now on the media ingestion page. And I'm just going to immediately hop on over to my edit page here. All right, so just to get started, I'm going to rough out the animation. I'm going to drag the first image down to my timeline. And you'll notice right away that our good friend DaVinci has given this image a duration. So instead of it being just a single frame, you can see here that it's actually going to expose that image for some period of time, which is great. And you get to change that. You can just grab the tail if you want. You can extend that to show it longer or show it shorter if you'd like. So I think I'm just going to click play and say, all right, this is going to be the introduction image. So that looks to be great, just about that long. So I'm going to feel it out. I'm not going to have any specific duration in mind to make this happen. I'm going to snap that to the timeline like so. And just to remind you that snapping will happen when we leave this magnet on here. All right, so let's just hop right into doing the animation. Now, it's helpful to be able to see what we're working with up here in our viewport. So I'm just going to expand this down just a little bit because I got to make abundantly sure that when I do this move, I'm just moving this image around up here like so. I'm not actually moving the image, I'm just moving the viewport. I'm using a touchpad on a laptop, so on a Mac, when I hold down 2 fingers, I can actually move the viewport. Not to be confused that I'm not moving the actual image in terms of its transformation. Now, many of you might be opening up DaVinci right now and seeing it like this, but I currently have this tool open here, which is my inspector. And we're going to need that because when we highlight any footage or audio in the software, we're going to see this pop up over here. So these are all the properties that relate to that image. Now, I want to make sure that this is larger than the viewport that we're currently looking at. And I have the project set to 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second in square pixels. So whenever you drag any footage, even if it's much larger in resolution than the actual project settings, DaVinci will always shrink down your footage to fit onto the canvas. Call it canvas, call it the workspace, call it the viewport, call it what you will, but it'll shrink it down to fit. So I'm going to make this move from right to left or left to right, I'm not sure yet. But in order to do that, I need to make sure that my image is much larger than the viewport itself. So I'm just going to zoom in like so. I don't want to lose too much of that text. The words down here that say Star Wars. So I'm going to reposition this, and I'm just using the integer number values up here. You'll see when you mouse over them, you get these arrows that pop up, and you can just click and drag to move stuff around exactly where you want it. Now, one thing that's super critical about animation, I mean, it's all got to do with timing, right? So one thing amateur animators forget to do is really think about where their timeline is. So when do you want these certain moves to happen? So I'm going to bring this all the way back to the beginning, and you'll notice that it jumped, the timeline jumped to the left, snap, because I've got the magnet turned on here. And at the first frame of this footage, I want to lay down what's called a keyframe. And the keyframe is going to help DaVinci to remember for that specific clip what these values should be. So I've changed zoom, I've changed position, so I'm going to have the software remember these values. So click on that little diamond, it'll turn red, and by doing that we have now established a keyframe at that moment in time as it relates to the footage. That's important to keep in mind. It's not global to the timeline itself, but it has created a timeline on this footage right here. So if we move this left and right and slide it around, those keyframes are going to move with it. Okay, so let's do a move. So just to see them, I'm going to drop this down here. I'm going to click on the far right control that looks like a diamond, and what I should see is, yes, a little white diamond down here that's telling me that transform has been animated. So that is the keyframe for transform. Cool. And then I'm going to do my move, but animation always happens over time, so I'm going to slip my timeline down to the end of the footage, like so. And then I'm going to change something about it. Now keep in mind, these two values are currently being animated. We've already established keyframes, so anything we do to these values will get recorded into the keyframe. It'll get baked into the moment in time where we have our playhead. And we should see, even if we just change the value by clicking and dragging, like I'm making sure that it still hangs outside of the viewport. If I click and drag the value, a red dot will pop up, a red diamond will pop up, and then I can worry about the positions. I'm just going to slide it. I don't want to slide it down, so I'm going to undo. That's Command Z or Control Z on a PC, and I'm going to drag the position X. Just have it slide over. Now I don't want to lose the words Star Wars, so I'm just going to do a subtle move. So it's just going to crawl slowly. Nice. So zooming out like so, zooming. And then when I hit play, it's nice and subtle. Now, if I wanted to retime this animation, in other words, I want to make it faster or I want to make it slower, all I need to do is grab these keyframes down here and I can slide them back and forth. I can slip and slide them. So maybe I want to see the image at its natural size, zoomed size at the beginning, and then have it start to crawl in and zoom in over time, and then have this animation happen faster. It'll be faster if I move the keyframes closer together. It'll be slower if I move them farther apart. So maybe I want this to happen a little bit quicker. I might even trim down my animation a little bit like so, just to make it happen faster before we transition to the next image, which will go above here, and just take a peek at it. Let's see. Now, there's no right or wrong answers with animation. You really have to just take your time and feel it out and look at it and watch it and see if you like what you're seeing. Yeah, it's art. So that's a little bit too slow for me, so I'm going to drag these keyframes together again. And what's nice is, although you're going to repeat this over and over again for your project work, I'm sort of setting a precedent here. I'm going to get something that looks great. Maybe it only looks great for this image, but it might be something that I want to use over and over again. Now, a common mistake animators make when they're just getting started, once more, is not really thinking about where the playhead is. So if you could be mindful for a second of where my playhead is. Like, say I accidentally just left it in between these two keyframes, and then I thought I was going to try to fix a problem by maybe changing my zoom. You watch carefully down on the timeline with this control open. Any change I make now to these properties that have animation turned on are going to create new keyframes. You can have as many keyframes on that timeline as you want, for one every frame if need be. But the smoothest looking animations have the fewest amount of keyframes. So I might have accidentally put the the timeline right smack in between for some reason, and then I want to fix the zoom or maybe fix the position, and then I click and drag, and you'll see what happens is I've created a new keyframe in the middle. Now, you might need to do that in some circumstances, but if I watch the video now, it's going to go down and then zoom. It looks really weird and really awkward. So you can undo that if you want, or you just jump down here and grab any old keyframe and just press the delete key. Press the delete key and get rid of that key. It's really that simple. So what I like to do is just be really mindful of where my timeline is every time I do a move for my animation. I keep my snap on, and then I snap to that moment to make sure my keyframe and my timeline line up. And then I do my positioning or my zooming. Rotation, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to have it come down like that. Now the viewer's already seen the word Star Wars, and that's cool. So when I press play now, with this nice smooth motion down like so. Now, one fundamental problem with this is it's kind of boring. It looks really, the motion looks really unnatural. And that is because we haven't really considered what is referred to as the interpolation of our keyframes. The software is always doing math in the background. So as we go from one keyframe to the next, what we end up seeing is these integer values that relate to position X or position Y. We see them, being recalculated by the system. Now, getting into too much math here maybe, but just to make an animation look a lot more attractive, when you've got your keyframes set up and you like the motion, you can always drop down this control set here by clicking on the little curve, and that's a spline, and now we can see how all of the different properties, mouse over them, zoom Y, position Y, position X. So all of these things are being changed over time. We can see their individual keyframes. And if you're not careful, you can click on them and drag them around, and you're actually changing the value and repositioning or re-zooming the content. So to make animations look more interesting, you just click and drag, highlight the two keyframes, and choose one of these options up here. This button here, second to the left, will create a curve between the two, which it's very subtle. And I think if I get my controls working here, you can subtly see it, that there's a curve happening between the two keys. And what that's causing was what's referred to as easing. So we're accelerating into the animation and decelerating out of the animation. And it just makes everything look and feel a whole lot nicer. Just looks a whole lot nicer. Now, what property did I change? Zoom Y. Is there another zoom value in here? There's only one zoom. There's position. Yeah, so we got to highlight all of these different lines because each one of these relate directly to the different properties that we've changed up here. So zoom X and zoom Y, they're linked together. Position X and position Y, those have been changed individually. So we see them down here on the timeline, like so, when we highlight the different properties. That's what these represent. So maybe position Y. I want that to ease in as well. So I clicked on the blue line, blue in my context. It might not be in yours because it assigns a different color every time you do a different animation. But I'm going to highlight the position Y, mouse over it to see that. And then I'm going to click and drag a box, highlight the two, and then click the second control, and that will turn that into a curve. It's very subtle here. You're not really seeing much of a curve. Should be able to zoom in and out, but because I'm using my control key, to do this other zooming, I can't see that. So let me see now, if I rewind, how that looks. Should ease in and then decelerate out. Nice. Super nice. And maybe if I want to fix something, maybe I don't like the fact that the top of wars is still visible. So once more, I want to change that value of its position. I've dealt with the easing, so I can turn this off now and bring my keys back up. I can slip and slide my timeline and have it snap to that moment like so, and I'll see the red dots are here, which informs my eye that I'm indeed working on a keyframe. If I'm not on a keyframe, like say I'm accidentally positioning my timeline between the two keys and I'm not currently sitting on a timeline, I'm not going to see those as red diamonds. So what I have to do, either drag the timeline to snap, or these are really powerful little controls here, these arrows. They're going to help you to jump to the previous keyframe or the next keyframe in the future to make you honest, to keep you honest, so that you're definitely working on the exact moment in time when you want to make that change. Otherwise, you start making all kinds of keyframes down on the timeline willy-nilly, and it can get really out of control. So a few things I'm looking for. I'll look carefully. I'm still outside. I'm zoomed outside of the picture plane, so I'm not accidentally going to see a black line. I've still got a little bit room to move down below, so I'm going to change my Y value here and just drag it down so it just says star. I'm going to close my keys and I'm going to expose this a little bit longer like so I can see it on screen for a while longer. Nice ease down to Ray's gnarly looking eyes. Cool. Now I move on to my next image. But I've done something kind of sneaky in the past as an animator. Because I like this move, I'm just going to use those moments in time again. Watch what I mean. I'm going to drag the second image down onto V2, onto the second video layer down below. I'm going to stretch out its duration to match. I'm going to drop down my keyframes like so. I'm going to jump here to key 1. It snaps because of the magnet. I'm going to go on up to zoom here and zoom out. Just click and drag. Now you'll notice that while I'm doing this, I don't have a red diamond because I haven't pushed it yet. You have to click on it once to let the system know that for this object, you're going to animate that specific property. I'm sounding like a computer programmer here because I've done a lot of computer programming, but these are objects, and objects have properties, methods, and events, and these are the properties related to this specific object we have highlighted here. Array. So now I've got animation on that keyframe. I can drag my timeline, scoot over here, and just zoom down. Make sure that the image is still outside of the bounds of the picture plane, and voila, I've got animation. It's going to be a linear interpolation, so it's going to be boring right now. Blech, don't like it. So I'm going to drop down my curves, grab those two by creating a box around them, and hit the curves button. Now we can see a nice, beautiful arc. And when I rewind, press play. Now, just to prove a use case, you can grab these in the graph view and move them around. So you can do retiming in the actual graph editor. You can grab individual keyframes, move them up and down, and position them left and right in time. There's even a little handle here that we can move once we've made this into a curve. We can actually grab this little handle and we can change our curves to affect our own easing. So maybe we want to customize this a little bit. But we're not seeing anything happen when I do this, right? Nothing's really happening. Why? Because the playhead is still here. I have to put it back to where it is in space. Not space, in time. And then move that around. You'll see it's actually changing the value as I go up and down, and when it's happening in time. Grab the handle if you want. And just click and drag it. And now we're making this happen really quickly through this arc, but it's still going to be nice and smooth. So we're going to see it static for a second, and then it'll start to move and then quickly zoom down and out. Nice. Now I might not like how long I saw that at the beginning, so I can drag the head if I want. Notice how the keyframes stay locked in. Another common mistake animators make is they'll do their edits after the fact. So watch this. If I drag my tail past the keyframe, I can't grab it anymore, and that can be really frustrating, but it is still there. So if I expose that again, okay, it'll pop back in. So now, just to make this look really pretty, I'm going to drag this second layer. Let me see the actual footage. I'm going to drag this second layer so that it overlaps with the first layer. And now I can apply a transition. So I'm going to go up to my effects in the top left here, and I'm just going to use a very, very simple video transition of cross dissolve. Nothing fancy, just a cross dissolve. It looks really attractive. And you can grab the tail of a dissolve and you can drag that over to happen over a longer period of time. So when I press play, it should look really nice. Yeah. Oh yeah. Cool. Super cool. And then, as I say, is rinse and repeat. Do this over and over and over again. Practice, practice, practice. And you're going to get really good at this. Now, the assignment does call for some titles. So if I throw in titles up here, maybe I'll just grab something simple. I would like for you as creative folks to maybe do something a little bit more interesting than the basic titles, right? So I'm just going to say here, Rey is Sith. Come up with a better title for my transmedia story, but in the end, what's important is that I get the technical nitty-gritty out to you all. So I'm going to have this fade in. I'll just drag that out. Love you, DaVinci. That fades in like so. Now that's maybe appropriate to have Rey just pop up like that. Timing is everything. So I'm just going to have the words fade out. Fade in. You can read it. Rey is Sith. Fade down. Timing is everything. Fade from black. It's always a nice way to start a video. That should look pretty cool. Cool. And of course, you've got a massive library of titles in here. Now, often Ken Buddard's effects look the best when the image is already in motion. Now, you notice I've left some time at the beginning where it's just still. Now, don't forget, these are my keyframes. And it does say transform, but if I drop this arrow down here, oh, whoa, cool. There's actually an arrow to drop down all of my properties. I'm going to test something. Close that up, drag this keyframe back to frame 1, because I want it to start in motion. At the very beginning, it's going to start to move. Now, if I drop this down, do all of my parameters change? Yes, they do. Very cool. But you can be very specific if you wanted to just change, say, the zoom factor. Position will end earlier than the zoom changes. You can get really granular with that little drop down. Yeah. Take a look. I'm gonna hit Command F, look at this full screen. Once more, spend a little much more time on your titles and your sound. So Ray is Sith. Starts in motion, just like Ken Burns taught us. We've got some beautiful acceleration, deceleration, easing in and easing out. Everything looks really nice. Awesome. Get out there, do some animation, everybody, and have a whole lot of fun. Enjoy.